On the 20 slides shown below, I present the original photographs of the Second World War from the German archive, which are in my collection. These photos are from my collection department, Wehrmacht on the Eastern and Western Fronts. If you like it, subscribe to my YouTube, like it, so you don't miss the new weekly presentations. If you would like to order 5 inches by 7 inches copies of these photos from the original, you can specify which photos you would like to receive. Laboratory quality. Enjoy your viewing. Bruno Brauer, the 4th of February 1893, the 20th of May 1947, was a general in the paratroop forces of Nazi Germany during World War II. He served as a commander on Crete, called Fortress Crete by the Germans, and then commanded the 9th Paratroop Division. In November 1942, Brauer replaced General Alexander Andrei as commander on Crete. On the 25th of March 1943, Greek Independence Day, he released 100 Cretans jailed in Agia prison. Among them was Konstantinos Mitsotakis, who later became MP and Prime Minister of Greece. After German failures at Stalingrad and El Alamein, Brauer ordered the construction of underground command bunkers, more defenses around Suda Bay and increased ammunition stocks. He was replaced by General Friedrich Wilhelm Müller the 31st of May 1944. In January 1945, the German 9th Parachute Division was formed under Brauer, mostly made up of Luftwaffe ground forces. In January 1945, 2 of his battalions were encircled by the 1st Ukrainian Front in Breslau, where they were destroyed. The rest of the division retreated back to the Silo Heights. Many of the troops fled when the Soviet barrage began. Before long, the line had nearly completely collapsed and many of Brauer's men began to desert. He suffered a nervous collapse and was relieved of his command. After his capture by the British, he was extradited to Greece for the deportation of the Cretan Jewish Greeks in May 1944 and put on trial there. Under the prosecution of Admiral Nicholas Zacharias, the Greek naval prosecutor, Brauer was accused of the deaths of 3,000 Cretans, massacres, systematic terrorism, deportation, pillage, wanton destruction, torture and ill treatment. Brauer was convicted and sentenced to death on the 9th of December 1946. He was executed by firing squad at 5 o'clock on the 20th of May 1947, the anniversary of the Axis invasion of Crete. The Fallschirmjager were the paratrooper branch of the German Luftwaffe before and during World War II. They were the first German paratroopers to be committed in large-scale airborne operations. Throughout World War II, the commander of the branch was Kurt Student. In March to April 1935, Göring transformed the Landespolizei General Göring into Germany's first dedicated airborne regiment, giving it the military designation Regiment General Göring, RGG, on 1 April 1935, after Hitler introduced conscription on 16 March 1935. The unit was incorporated into the newly formed Luftwaffe on 1 October of the same year and training commenced at Altengrabo. Göring also ordered that a group of volunteers be drawn for parachute training. These volunteers would form a Corps Fallschirmschutzen Parachute Soldiers Battalion, a cadre for future Fallschirmtrupp, parachute troops. In January 1936, 600 men and officers formed the 1st Jaeger Battalion/RGG, commanded by Bruno Brauer. The 1st Parachute Division was formed in 1938. It carried out airborne operations in the early stages of the war, including the successful capture of Fort Ébène-Mal in Belgium. It later fought in the Battle of Crete, but after heavy losses there, Hitler refused to consider using his troops in a significant airborne role again. It became the 1st Parachute Division in 1942, when it was reformed in Russia. The division existed as a fighting unit until the German surrender in Italy of 2 May 1945, 1 week before the end of World War II in Europe. During the German invasion of Poland in September 1939, the Fallschirmjäger were sent to occupy several airfields between the Vistula and Bug rivers. The first opposed airborne attacks occurred during the Norwegian campaign, first during the initial invasion when Fallschirmjager captured the defended airbase of Sola, near Stavanger. The Fallschirmjager also had their first defeat in Norway, when a company was dropped on the village and railroad junction of Dombås on the 14th of April 1940 and was destroyed by the Norwegian army in a 5-day battle. On the 10th of May 1940, the Fallschirmjager performed a successful raid on the powerful fortification known as Ebenemal. Ebenemal consisted of multiple gun emplacements and was defended by 1,200 Belgian troops. There are few better representations by elite troops and everything was cutting edge at the time, from tactics to method of deployment. The airborne troops attacked the artillery casements and pillboxes with flamethrowers, demolition charges, and hollow charge grenades. The mission was accomplished by Sturmgruppe Granit, Assault Group Granite, which consisted of only 85 soldiers. Despite being at both a numerical and firepower disadvantage, the airborne troops took control of the fort after a few hours of fighting. Hermann Bernhard Romke, the 24th of January 1889, the 4th of July 1968, was a German general of paratroop forces during World War II. He led units in Crete, North Africa, Italy, the Soviet Union and France, and was captured by American forces at the conclusion of the Battle for Brest in September 1944. He was a recipient of the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, one of only 27 people in the Nazi German military so decorated. Romke was an ardent Nazi who committed war crimes. Following the fighting on Crete in 1941, he ordered his men to attack civilians. In 1951 Romke was convicted of war crimes against French civilians during the Battle of Brest, but was released after 3 months' imprisonment. During the 1950s he was a prominent nationalist and supported extreme right-wing movements. During the invasion of the Netherlands over 2,000 troops of the 7th Air Division were deployed, while approximately 12,000 troops of the 22nd Air Landing Division also participated. The Fallschirmjager successfully captured bridges at Moerdijk and Dordrecht. The airborne troops suffered heavy casualties while taking Dordrecht. The paratroopers were able to capture airfields at Valkenburg, Ockenburg, Walhaven, and Penburg. Yet, the Germans failed to capture The Hague and forced the Dutch to surrender. Therefore, the performance of the paratroopers in the Netherlands was mixed as far as efficiency and results was concerned. The 22nd Air Landing Division was forced to land many of its aircraft on exposed motorways because the 7th Air Division had failed to secure designated airfields. Most aircraft ended up being shot up by Dutch infantry and artillery fire. The airborne troops were able to cause disruption behind Dutch lines. During the Greece campaign, the German airborne forces would perform their last strategic parachute and glider performances of the war. The airborne troops captured a critical bridge that crossed the canal in the Isthmus of Corinth so German forces could pursue Allied forces further in the Greek mainland. The operation did not go smoothly due in part to heavy enemy ground fire. Demolition charges were also accidentally detonated, due to carelessness, leading to damage to the bridge and heavy casualties. One group of paratroopers was accidentally dropped into the sea where they all drowned. The airborne forces did manage to capture British anti-aircraft positions, which forced the surrender of the local town. 12,000 Commonwealth and Greek troops were also captured. The German airborne forces suffered 63 killed and 174 wounded. During the 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union, the 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 1st Parachute Regiment and the 2nd Battalion of the Luftlandesturm Regiment, Air Landing Assault Regiment, were assigned to the Army Group North's 18th Army where they would conduct operations in the Leningrad area. The Fallschirmjager was specifically deployed to the east of Leningrad on the River Neva to confront a Red Army effort to relieve the city. In October 1941, The German paratroopers were involved in heavy fighting against the Soviets and were successful in holding off Soviet attacks. From late October 1941 until the 4th of July 1942, the 22nd Air Landing Division participated in the siege of Sevastopol. The Fallschirmjager overran most of the Soviet 79th Naval Infantry Brigade during combat operations. The Soviet unit tried counter-attacking on the 10th of June, but was repulsed. The Soviet formation was effectively destroyed, with the support of the Luftwaffe, which used anti-personnel bombs against Soviet infantry caught in the open. In July 1942, the Romka Parachute Brigade was deployed to North Africa to assist the Axis war effort there. In late October the brigade participated in the Second Battle of El Alamein. The brigade successfully captured a British supply column which provided it with some trucks and much-needed supplies for the retreat westwards. Between November and December 1942, the 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 5th Parachute Regiment were flown into Tunisia to protect its airfields and take up defensive positions around the city of Koch during the Allied Operation Torch. It was followed closely by the 11th Parachute Pioneer Battalion under the command of Major Rudolf Witzig. It had the strength of 716 men. It took up defensive positions west of Tunis where it had a series of battles with the advance guard of the Allied spearhead. Parts of the unit had received special training in reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. This intelligence led to the last parachute drop in North Africa. The operation ended up a major failure due to mostly inexperienced and poorly trained pilots. The Fallschirmjager were dropped too far from their targets. The Paras never made it to their targets because many were captured by British patrols as they landed. On the 26th of December 1942, the men of Parachute Company of the Brandenburg Regiment were transported by gliders in an operation to destroy bridges and supply routes used by the British. It too was a disaster. Some of the gliders were shot down while flying over enemy lines while others were destroyed while approaching their targets. Most of the Paras were killed in the operation. The 2nd Parachute Regiment, an assault regiment battalion, and anti-tank and machine gun battalions were sent to conduct operations in Ukraine. They would be assigned to Army Group South. This force would be known as Kampfgruppe Sturm commanded by Oberst Alfred Sturm. The Fallschirmjäger suffered heavy casualties while defending a sector along the River Meuse around the town of Charzisk during the winter of 1941 and into early 1942. In March 1943, the Fallschirmjäger of the 3rd Battalion of the 4th Regiment, 7th Airborne Division defended a hill at Luchy on the Eastern Front. They were reinforced by Paras from 3rd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment. Between 20 to 27 March these two battalions held off two complete Soviet divisions. In May 1943, what was left of Fallschirmjäger units in North Africa had been captured by Allied forces. The Fallschirmjäger commanders were flown out of North Africa and managed to escape captivity. On the 12th of September 1943, the Fallschirmjäger conducted a successful rescue mission of Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini at the Gran Sasso. It is known as the Gran Sasso Raid. The operation received wide acclaim despite there being very little enemy resistance during the operation. Only 2 enemy soldiers died during the operation. The primary unit responsible for the success of the mission was Fallschirmjäger Lehr Battalion. It was considered elite of the elite and named for security reasons 1/FJR7. It was under the command of Major Harold Moores. General Kurt Student played a major role in the planning of the operation. The operation ended up being controversial due to Waffen-SS legend Otto Skorzeny also participating in the operation. Skorzeny and his participating 26 Waffen-SS troops managed to take much of the credit for the success of the operation despite the fact the 82 Fallschirmjäger soldiers played a more significant role during the operation. Skorzeny received a promotion to Sturmbannführer, the award of the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross and fame that led to his most dangerous man in Europe image. During the 26th of September 1943 to the 16th of November 1943, the Fallschirmjager participated in the Battle of Leros. On October 1943, the 22nd Air Landing Division participated in the Battle of Kos. In November 1943, the 2nd Parachute Division was ordered to the Eastern Front where it took up position near the Russian-held town of Zhytomyr. The Red Army was to seize a communication center there and destroy the entire German southern wing. The Red Army's primary aim was also to take Kiev. By December the Red Army had massed a large force northeast of the city. The Fallschirmjager managed to assist other German forces in plugging the gaps created by the Soviet advance. On the 15th of December 1943, the 2nd Parachute Division was airlifted to Kirovograd and put on the front at Klintsy. It was supported by the 11th Panzer Division and the 286th Self-Propelled Artillery Brigade. The Fallschirmjager participated in fierce fighting around Novgorodka. By the 23rd of December the paratroopers stabilized the front but suffered heavy casualties. During 17 January, the 18th of May 1944, the Fallschirmjager participated in the Battle of Monte Cassino. Allied forces' aim was a breakthrough to Rome. At the beginning of 1944, the western half of the Winter Line was being anchored by Germans holding the Rapido Gari, Liri and Garigliano valleys and some of the surrounding peaks and ridges. Together, these features formed the Gustav Line. Monte Cassino, a historic hilltop abbey founded in AD 529 by Benedict of Nursia, dominated the nearby town of Cassino and the entrances to the Liri and Rapido valleys. Lying in a protected historic zone, it had been left unoccupied by the Germans. They had defended some positions set into the steep slopes below the abbey's walls. Repeated pinpoint artillery attacks on Allied assault troops caused their leaders to conclude the abbey was being used by the Germans as an observation post, at the least. Fears escalated along with casualties, and in spite of a lack of clear evidence, it was marked for destruction. On the 15th of February American bombers dropped 1,400 tons of high explosives, creating widespread damage. The raid failed to achieve its objective, as the Fallschirmjager occupied the rubble and established excellent defensive positions amid the ruins. Between 17 January and the 18th of May, Monte Cassino and the Gustav defenses were assaulted 4 times by Allied troops, the last involving 20 divisions attacking along a 20-mile front. The German defenders were finally driven from their positions, but at a high cost. The capture of Monte Cassino resulted in 55,000 Allied casualties, with German losses being far fewer, estimated at around 20,000 killed and wounded. In early January 1944, the Red Army conducted a new offensive against the 2nd Parachute Division. The Fallschirmjager suffered heavy casualties. The 2nd Battalion of the 5th Regiment was destroyed. By the 6th of January 1944 the 7th, 5th, and 2nd Regiments had been forced to retreat from Novgorodka due to the efforts of the Red Army. The Paras dug in around Kirovograd. In March the Red Army once again resumed operations against the 2nd Parachute Division. By the last week of the month the Red Army had forced the Paras across the southern Bug River where they would establish defensive positions on the opposite bank. By May the Red Army forced the Fallschirmjager back to the river of Dniester. The Fallschirmjager had been decimated by the fighting, and by the end of the month the division was transferred back to Germany for refitting. On the 3rd of July 1944 the 2nd Parachute Corps battled the U.S. First Army at Coutances-Marigny-Saint-Lô. The Fallschirmjager utilized the terrain of the so-called bocage and the hedgerows to their advantage to negate American superiority in both firepower and quantity of troops. The Fallschirmjager inflicted heavy casualties on American forces due mostly to tactical superiority and the terrain preventing the Americans from utilizing their armored forces. On the 11th of July 1944 the 1st Battalion, 9th Parachute Regiment executed a successful attack on the U.S. 1st Battalion, 115th Infantry Regiment. Initially, the Americans would suffer the loss of their outposts mostly due to German artillery and mortar fire. The Americans held due to their artillery and air support, and the Paras eventually were forced to retreat. On the 11th of July 1944, the 3rd Parachute Division suffered heavy casualties while attempting to prevent American forces from capturing the city of St. Lo. The German 12th Parachute Gun Brigade, 3rd Parachute Reconnaissance Company, and 3rd Engineer Battalion all suffered heavy casualties, mostly due to outstanding American artillery fire. The Paras would hold out until 27 July due to their great effort. German forces managed to inflict 11,000 casualties on its American opponents. On the 25th of July 1944, the 21st Parachute Pioneer Battalion was positioned on the road between Donneberg and Kauvno in Lithuania. The Red Army attacked the battalion the following day. The battalion would be encircled and eventually destroyed. The unit would be disbanded and sent to other Fallschirmjager units. On the 25th of July 1944, the 2nd Parachute Division was involved in the defense of Brest against the American 7th Corps. American forces suffered 4,000 casualties in its effort to invest the port. Other elements of the 2nd Parachute Division were destroyed by American armored forces while on their way to assist the 5th Parachute Division at St. Malo. American forces captured Brest on the 20th of September 1944. What was left of the 2nd Parachute Corps was sent to Cologne after falaise for rest and refitting. Heiter's 6th Parachute Regiment went to Gestrau-Mecklenburg to form the foundation of a new regiment. In September 1944, the 1st Parachute Corps fought in the Allied offensive in Italy known as Operation Olive. In September 1944, the 4th Parachute Division was defending positions at the Futu and Tujogo passes when the US 91st and 85th Divisions mounted an attack. This was followed by 6 days of intense fighting. American forces succeeded in capturing the 2nd Jogo Pass, Monticelli Ridge, and Monte Altuzzo, in Italy, mostly due to the overwhelming firepower of American forces. On the 21st of September 1944, British and Canadian forces were successful in overcoming defensive positions occupied by the 1st Parachute Corps to capture Rimini. On the 13th of October 1944, Axis forces which included the 4th Parachute Division managed to halt an Allied 2nd Corps advance south of Bologna, Italy. In April 1945, the 9th Parachute Division would be destroyed while trying to contain a Russian bridgehead on the west bank of the River Roda. What remained of the unit would be destroyed while trying to defend Berlin from the Red Army. In April 1945, the 10th Parachute Division would be destroyed by the Red Army in Austria. The division's artillery battalion was destroyed in Fellbach by the Red Army. What remained of the unit would be destroyed north of Brunn. On the 15th of April 1945, 760 Allied bombers pounded the positions of 1st Parachute Corps and other Axis units in the Argenta Gap, Italy. The paratroopers continued to fight, but by the 18th of April, the Axis forces wavered to the massive Allied ground and aerial onslaught. In May 1945, the remaining paratroopers of the 1st and 4th Parachute Divisions surrendered in Italy along with the remaining Axis forces. The Allied forces had succeeded in driving Axis forces into the open where massive air support inflicted heavy casualties and material losses. The Axis campaign in Italy had ended in defeat. According to the General Staff of the Wehrmacht, the Fallschirmjager had suffered the following losses by February 1945. 21,309 enlisted men and 732 officers killed. 56,388 enlisted men and 1,206 officers wounded. 43,896 enlisted men and 889 officers missing. Total, 121,593 enlisted men and 2,827 officers.